In this chapter, I will discuss the origins of the Sustainable Development Goals. How did they arise? Why did the United Nations member states, the governments all over the world, decide that at this time we need Sustainable Development Goals? The core idea is to set clear goals to help orient the behavior of governments, of businesses, of each of us as citizens, as students, as researchers, as activists, as consumers, so that we're pointed in a shared direction. This is the idea of goal-based development. And I always think of the wonderful observation of a great American leader, President John F. Kennedy, when he talked about the importance of setting clear goals to help move a society forward. He said that by defining our goal more clearly, by making it seem more manageable and less remote, we help all people to see it, to draw hope from it, and to move irresistibly toward it. The core of the Sustainable Development Goals is to help the world to move irresistibly towards sustainable development. That means a planet of shared prosperity, of social inclusion, and of environmental sustainability. The history of the SDGs really goes back several decades. One might say more than 45 years, back to a pivotal United Nations conference that took place in Stockholm in 1972, called the Conference on the Human Environment. That was the first conference ever of the UN member states that recognized that the economy on one side and the environment on the other hand were on a kind of collision course, because the increasing weight of human activity on nature was leading to environmental risks of a magnitude and a scale that were unprecedented. 1972 was also the year in which a very important book was published, Limits to Growth, which was the first computer model of wide note that explained that if we were to simply continue to have economic growth with the then existing technologies, the scale of the global economy after a few decades of constant geometric growth would be so large that the burdens on the physical Earth systems would become overwhelming. So Limits to Growth and the Conference on the Human Environment way back in 1972, put us on the course towards the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, 15 years later, a very important commission was established under the leadership of Dr. Gro Harlem Brundtland, then the Prime Minister of Norway. And the Brundtland Commission established the idea of sustainable development itself. And that was a tremendous breakthrough. The Brundtland Commission defined sustainable development in this way. It said sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the current generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So this is an idea of intergenerational justice and intergenerational sustainability, that we, the current generation, have a responsibility to the future to manage our lives and manage the economy in such a way that we do not hinder future generations in meeting their needs. That concept of sustainable development was then embraced 5 years later on the 20th anniversary of the Stockholm Conference at what became known as the Earth Summit. The technical name was the UN Conference on Environment and Development. It took place in Rio de Janeiro, the Rio Earth Summit in 1992, adopted the concept of sustainable development as a shared global concept, and it adopted 3 major multilateral environmental agreements. The first, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. The second, the Convention on Biological Diversity for biological conservation. And third, the UN Convention to combat desertification, to stop the spread of deserts in the dryland regions of the world. 3 wonderful treaties. But 20 years after that, when once again the UN member states came together in 2012, once again in Rio, in a conference that logically was known as the Rio Plus 20 conference on the 20th anniversary of the Earth Summit, there was a pretty grim realization that not only had the concept of sustainable development not really taken hold, but the 3 multilateral environmental agreements on climate, on biodiversity, and on combating deserts had not functioned properly. They were not being implemented. And so at the Rio Plus 20 summit, government said, what can we do? How can we put sustainable development in front of the world so that people everywhere understand the urgency? And they were operating in the context of another set of goals about fighting poverty that had been adopted in the year 2000 for the 15-year period, 2000 to 2015, known as the Millennium Development Goals, or MDGs. So at the Rio Plus 20 summit, the government of Colombia and then many other governments said, aha, we have goal-based development to fight poverty, the Millennium Development Goals. How about goal-based initiatives for sustainable development, or sustainable development goals? The idea caught on that the MDG era, 2000 to 2015, would be followed by a sustainable development goal, or SDG era, for the period 2015 to 2030. And indeed, the member states in the General Assembly went to work after the Rio Plus 20 summit and began to negotiate what should these SDGs be. Well, they took a survey of governments, and initially the list was about 300 proposed goals. That would not do. So over the 3 years, they negotiated, compressed, chose priorities, aggregated objectives, and so forth. And by the middle of 2015, came to 17 high priority goals for prosperity, people, and planet, or for economic, social, and environmental objectives. And those 17 goals were embedded in the overall commitment to Agenda 2030, and they became, therefore, the framework of cooperation for the period to 2030. We have Agenda 2030 as the broad framework. We have the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the 169 targets. Now, these goals were adopted by acclamation on September 25th, 2015. And just a few weeks after that, another pivotal event took place in Paris, when on December 12th, an agreement was reached to finally implement in a serious way the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. That agreement, reached on December 12, 2015, is called the Paris Climate Agreement. It is absolutely bound together with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Indeed, SDG 13, to stop global warming, to stop human-induced climate change, essentially embraces the Paris Climate Agreement as the core of SDG 13. So I'd like us in this course to view the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the broader Agenda 2030 framework and the Paris Climate Agreement, all as the overarching framework of global cooperation for sustainable development. And our task now, recognizing that all 193 governments have said this is important, this is urgent, this is the shared direction we need to take, that we do our best to understand what will really be needed for the success of meeting these 17 SDGs and the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement. Stay tuned. That's what we're going to analyze next.